Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for being here early today at 3:30. We will welcome the Assembly Committee on Legislative Operations, and will the Secretary please take the roll?
Assemblymember Cole. Dickman. Edgeworth. Gonzalez. Hibbets. Howdigi. Miller. Monroe Moreno. Moore. Nadeem. Chair Mosca.
And I am here, if we can please mark Assemblymember Hattigi absent excused. And so we welcome the audience here in Carson City, those joining by video conference in Las Vegas, and those listening over the internet. Before we begin, I'll make several housekeeping announcements. Please silence your electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card to the committee secretary. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state and spell your name. We spell our name for our committee secretary so we can make sure we have the right record, and turn off the microphone each time you're done speaking. There are hard copies of the meeting materials available for the public, and members of the public may also access electronic copies of the materials on the Nevada Legislature's website. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting, and each person will be limited to 2 minutes. Public comment is for things under the Legislative Operations and Elections purview and are not about any of the bills we're hearing today. You also can submit written testimony up to 24 hours after the meeting. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we may not agree with each other's positions. And finally, committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documents, and please don't see this as a sign of inattention or disrespect. And our first item we are going to do today will actually be a BDR introduction. And so please recall that a vote in favor of introducing a BDR does not imply a commitment to support the measure later. All this action does is allow the BDR to become a bill and enter the legislative hearing process. It does not imply commitment to support final passage. So we will introduce now BDR 16-1134 revises provisions relating to the counting of incarcerated persons for purposes of the apportionment of the population for certain election districts. And with that, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion from Vice Chair Gonzalez and a second from Assemblymember Monroe Moreno. Any discussion on the measure? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. And the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 123. This measure revises provisions relating to election communications. We will have Assemblymember Nadeem presenting AB 123 today with some co-presenters. And as a reminder, please limit your presentation to 15 minutes. So the public knows today, because of time constraints, we do have to be at the floor by 4:45 p.m. We will be limiting testimony to 20 minutes in support, in opposition, and as well as in neutral. And so please begin when you are ready, and don't forget to state and spell your name for the record.
Thank you, Chair Moscow and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Hanadi Nadeem. I'm representing Assembly District 34 in Clark County. I am pleased to present Assembly Bill 123 before you today, along with Athar Hasibullah, Executive Director of ACLU of Nevada. This bill addresses threats against and intimidation of candidates for public office. Unfortunately, I have first-hand experience with receiving death threats in connection to a political campaign. This past year, when I was running for the Assembly, I was subject to disgraceful campaign tactics that incited others to threaten my life. It was truly a horrific experience. I do not wish upon anyone, whether it be a fellow candidate, voter, or Nevadan. No one should have to fear for their life or to be discouraged from running for office because of the actions of another. As someone who was targeted during my campaign, I am passionate about reducing violence and intimidation during political campaigns. And I believe AB 123 will help achieve that goal. As originally written, AB 123 prohibits candidates from threatening the life of another person during any speech or other communication made in the course of his or her political campaign. My co-presenter, Assemblymember Joanne Jackson, will be sharing his experience with us.
Jovan Jackson for the record. In 2022, I ran for city council, and I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with the text message app. We get a lot of text messages during elections. So this app, I send out a message just, campaigning. I'm Jovan Jackson, running for office. And, a lot of those responses directly attack just my identity. Not anything about me other than just my race. And, I really debated if, I should use the word that, that was told to me on record, but I will spare you guys that trauma and that pain. But basically, text messages saying like, N-word, I'm not voting for you. N-word, I will kill you. N-word, stop texting me. Those are the type of text messages that I receive just solely about my identity. As elected officials, we're all familiar about being attacked about our identity or maybe even our character, our decisions. So this bill is just asking that, those who necessarily don't cross the finish line, that are just candidates, that they receive some level of protection from these racial slurs or, attack on people that's running for office with their character. And I would like to pass the presentation to Jovan Jackson for the record. I would like to pass the rest of the presentation to ACLU.
For the record, Attar Hasibullah, first name spelled Athar, last name Haseebullah. I'm the executive director for the ACLU of Nevada. I'm going to be walking you through the technicals of the bill and the iterations that were changed by way of amendment, what the bill would do, and then happy to answer any technical questions in response. I do want to start by noting traditionally the ACLU wouldn't be involved in working on a harassment-related item, but what was very important to us was making sure that there were clear legal standards in place, that the First Amendment does remain protected, but also that there are provisions in place for when a candidate for public office experiences things like death threats or threats to property, and there's some level of recourse given. As it stands right now, there is ambiguity surrounding whether or not candidates for public office would fall under the actual purview of the ordinary harassment statutes that are there. There's really two that we tend to look at. If we look at NRS 200.571, that speaks to broad harassment and the way that it could be utilized in general. And then we look at NRS 199.300, and what that does is it applies to different sets of individuals, including public officials who are already in office. But it leaves this piece about candidates out. And what we wanted to do is make sure, as this is being presented, and there are more issues that are occurring during elections, that there's really clear guidance with respect to what the law is here and a clear standard that occurs if someone is subjected to harassment that is a candidate. Nothing here will be construed as interfering with First Amendment rights because already this language is not protected. These specific actions would not be protected in that fashion. So I'll walk you through what the initial bill did is it applied a conscious disregard standard and had the language laid out. What the conceptual amendment is that's been uploaded to Nellis that I'll be speaking to right now is it actually modifies the standard to comport with existing harassment law. Again, that's been utilized for several years over. This is a new standard here. It strikes the existing Section 1 and specifically replaces that with the language that's included, which I won't read off to you, but for those that are listening, again, the modification there is person shall not directly or indirectly address any threat or intimidation to a candidate for public office if if that threat, and again, it's either immediately or in the future, is a threat to cause or induce another to cause bodily injury to a candidate for public office or their family member, or to cause or induce another to cause physical damage to the property of a candidate for public office or a known family member. That's section 1. So that's the existing conformance with the harassment statute. What this bill does, which is notable, is in the second part, in letter B, that's in the conceptual amendment, it provides a two-set process for dealing with and addressing these issues. What that looks like is the first step would be upon a written correspondence by a candidate who stated that they were subject to harassment, an investigation would occur by the Secretary of State's office within 30 days of receipt of that correspondence delineating and prescribing what happened. The Secretary of State's office would be required to issue a written report back that effectively states whether or not the conditions of Section 1 were violated. Thereafter, exclusive jurisdiction for prosecution of these items would lie with the Attorney General's office. Now, let me explain why it was written in a two-tiered component, right? As it stands right now, district attorneys' offices are able to investigate, but that poses unique considerations when you're dealing with statewide issues, primarily when we're dealing with investigatory actions that deal with elections. That tends to fall within the gambit of the Secretary of State's office, our chief elections officer for the state. What we didn't necessarily want to happen was to go directly to the Attorney General's office in there, because the main component that candidates consistently complain about, and I don't have to explain to you, I've never been a candidate for public office, hopefully I never will be, but all of you up here have been, and because you have been, you've seen directly what the threats are that you face, and oftentimes what happens is if you receive those threats and you file a complaint, nothing's done. You're told you're running for office, this is political speech that occurs, and oftentimes, in most instances, it will be protected political speech that occurs. But what does need to happen is some level of correspondence needs to take some of these threats seriously. That's why that Secretary of State report becomes so critical. So if you are threatened in that fashion, again, with conditions of Term 1 and Term 2, the SOS would be responsible for providing a written report within 30 days. Jurisdiction would then vest in the Attorney General's office for prosecution of those offenses when they occur. We think that creates at least clear stability with respect to addressing these issues in an era of increasing violence and threats lodged against candidates as well. The Secretary of State, much the same way as the Attorney General's office is, oftentimes deals with a gambit of First Amendment related issues. We do have confidence that there wouldn't be something that comes back in that regard that says otherwise, but should there be concerns about frivolity in the cases that are presented or the reports that are lodged, certainly a prosecution in that instance would need to take that again into account. So the Attorney General's office, by virtue of prosecuting, as is the case with every prosecution, you're required to complete your own independent investigation into the action before you're able to do anything. That first step, though, provides some level of solace to a candidate who's running for office to at least know that their threats are being treated seriously and they're not summarily dismissed. The Amendment C and D here simply add the co-sponsors to the bill. I'm sure, without speaking on behalf of the Assembly member, that she'd likely be willing to accept additional co-sponsors if there are those folks. And with that, happy to answer any technical questions about the bill.
Ready? Okay, well, thank you so much. With that, we will move on to questions. First, we'll start with Assembly Member Miller.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'll start by saying that it was just the other night that a fellow member and myself were sharing with a group of people all of our experiences and experiences of other candidates and electeds, things that we know of dangerous and threatening activities, even showing up around people's homes, houses, things that I've personally been through. And it's a lot more than people ever think. As candidates, we feel we have to be strong and project a certain persona that, nothing bothers us, and this is just par for the course, and this is just political banter. But at some point, it's not. At some point, it's very scary. It is threatening, and there are a lot of people that would act on it. And especially when it extends to our families as well. So thank you for bringing this bill. And again, it's just interesting because we feel like we cannot always express publicly those things that are happening, as well as our concern to not cross First Amendment speech, right? But it doesn't cover threats for someone else's life. So with that, my question is, it's based off of the amendment. So of the proposed amendments, under B, where it talks about the process that the Secretary of State would have 30 days to substantiate a finding, and then the Attorney General would have the ability to actually prosecute, to determine whether or not they would prosecute. My question is, it feels like this bill's written when these threats are coming from just somebody in the public. Has there been a consideration made for when the threats are coming from other candidates?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, if I can go directly to the Assembly member?
Please.
Thank you. That is encompassed within the language in and of itself. So if an individual who's a candidate for public office believes that they've been subjected to the provisions of Section 1 here, which would be effectively the harassment provisions, they're able to obviously submit that written correspondence. That includes the information for the person who's lodging the complaint. So that would actually be covered by this. What won't be covered by this, which is significantly more difficult almost up front, is threats by an unknown anonymous source. And oftentimes that makes its way by way of social media. One thing we can mention with respect to those specific instances is that's where First Amendment considerations probably become arguably the most challenging in terms of assessing how they're portrayed, because you don't have an individual actor who's stepping up at that point to say, I'm the person who stated that, right? It's an unknown, ambiguous entity. In those types of instances, there's very rarely, if ever, likely to be a prosecution without an actual full-on investigation occurring, including a search warrant or something of that nature to be able to locate the individual lodging the threats, right? And with VPNs, we know that's not always going to be the case. So with respect to your question, threats by another candidate would be included if they meet the significant considerations under letter A here. The anonymous ones, again, the complaint can be made and the SOS will be responsible for issuing that report back to the candidate who instituted the complaint in the first place.
Follow-up, Chair?
Yes.
So based on this, and thank you for that response, we're talking about criminal charges under the Attorney General, but oftentimes there are other civil sanctions that people could have. And I'm just wondering if it was ever considered that if a candidate was prosecuted or found guilty of this, and I know this would now fall back to the Secretary of State, but the removal of that candidate from their candidacy on the ballot, if that would be a consideration.
For the record, Tar Hasibullah, I can only answer that right now as we constructed this, that wasn't a consideration for purposes of that bill. That's, I think, a much more slippery slope when we start getting into the ability to pursue public office. From both a legal and a policy perspective, we thought this actually was probably the most measured response. It's also the same with respect to civil penalties. Someone could theoretically seek to pursue civil penalties in some regard there. More often than not, the broadest issue that happens, as you all are well aware, from a candidate's perspective, is when they're subject to a threat of death, namely, and there's an imminent risk associated with that potentially. It's not, maybe the most immediate thing that can happen is just to understand that a government entity that's responsible for conducting investigations is in fact investigating this, and it's not being summarily disregarded. I think we'll be able to ascertain over the course of the next few years whether this needs to be modified in any way, shape, or form, but as it stands right now, we think this conforms best to the existing language while also providing for significant First Amendment protections in place.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hibbets.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the differences between the amendment and the original bill, and the amendment says A strikes the existing section 1 of the bill in its entirety and replaces it with this language. One thing that I noticed that is struck from section 1 that is not included in the amendment is the severity of crime. Can you, one of you speak to that? Are we keeping the severity of crime misdemeanor then gross misdemeanor, or are we upping that, or what's the story there? For
the record, Atar Hasibullah, Assemblymember Hibbets, That's an error. The penalty portion would remain the same with respect to the existing language. The context of Section 1, and that's what, it should have struck Section 1. I think that's how I'm reading it too. It only strikes Section 1 of the existing bill. It doesn't strike the entirety of the bill. It strikes the entirety of Section 1 of the bill.
That's what I'm saying, section 1 is the entire
Sorry,
bill.
Section 1, subsection 1. I'll rephrase. I'm looking at it right now. So it should be modified to include strikes the existing Section 1, subsection 1 of the bill and replaces it with the following language. Section 1, subsections 2 and subsections 3 would remain in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Chair, and I have a few questions, if that's okay, and we may need the Secretary of State's office representative. My first question, proof that this has happened. It's really sad. Being in politics now, as opposed to when I originally ran in 2015, has become much more dangerous to be an elected official in our country because it seems like it's politically correct to be mean to folks, unfortunately. And as a mentor, I tell my candidates, you need to run on who you are, what you've done for your community, and what you plan to do for your community, and not trying to take someone else down. Unfortunately, not everyone runs that way. So what would the proof of the candidate that's being threatened need to be for the investigation for the Secretary's State's office? Would it be a police report that's been submitted? Would it be photos of maybe damage? Would it be recordings of phone conversations or the text messages? What kind of proof would the candidate that's being threatened need to present to the Secretary of State's office that would assist in the investigation?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, Assemblymember Monroe Moreno. So the question, that specific response would involve a totality of the circumstance consideration. The Secretary's office, much the same way any investigatory agency would do, would be able to consider all of the factors that are presented in making such an informed decision. But because it is case-specific, it would end up, in order for that to be substantiated, something like that to be substantiated, it would need to meet the standards that are involved within Section 1, subsection 1, which are specifically demonstrating those two provisions, the causation and intent, or causation to induce another to cause bodily injury to a candidate for public office, or the same with respect to property damage. And one other thing I'll mention with respect to the free speech portions of this isn't a bill that would preclude someone from being mean, being nasty, being disgusting, being disgraceful during the pendency of campaigns. As an outside actor looking in, I'd argue that's almost every campaign that I've generally seen that's competitive. But what it would do is preclude the ability for that extra step to occur, which is actually the risk to somebody's life and physical safety or their property or that of their family members. To your point, it's already dangerous enough to be a candidate. We think these provisions provide some level of balance, but for the Secretary's office or for the Attorney General's office or any other agency to be involved, they'd have to assess each and every one of the circumstances surrounding what's occurred and then see if those meet the actual qualifications as prescribed within Section A of the proposed amendment.
And I see that our Secretary of State has joined in Las Vegas. Secretary of State's office has joined, if you'd like to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gabriel DeCara, Gabriel, DI space CHIARA, for the record, Chief Deputy Secretary of State. A few things to add, and first I'd like to thank Assemblymember Nadeem for bringing the bill, the co-presenters for presenting. The member did reach out to us prior to this bill being brought, and we had some good conversations. In response to Assemblymember Monroe Moreno's questions, just a few quick points. So the Secretary of State's office does have criminal investigators that investigate crimes that are under our purview, primarily sections NRS chapters 293, 294A, and NRS 90 are where we have potential criminal violations to investigate. Our investigators do absolutely use any and all means at their disposal to investigate these crimes. However, and you know, this will come up in our neutral testimony later on. Traditionally, the Secretary of State's office does not issue a finding of fact that a crime has been committed. We do an investigation, make a recommendation, and refer that to the Attorney General's office for potential prosecution. But a point of nuance in the bill is we would not want it to seem like the Secretary of State's office is able to definitively say a crime has occurred, because that's not necessarily within our investigative authority. I hope that helps answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That does answer my question, and it answers another question that I had. Would the Secretary of State's office have to employ additional staff? I don't think everyone knows that the Secretary of State's office currently has a criminal investigative division. So thank you for putting that on the record. And just a comment, thank you for bringing this bill, because during my first election, there were no threats. However, after serving in this legislative body, there has been threats and a death threat put on my life that involved my family. So I truly understand what you went through as a candidate, that you shouldn't, and no candidate, I don't care what side of the aisle they're on, should have to go through what you went through. My other question, for fictitious websites that are set up that spread hate and anger and hate and anger and lies about a candidate, would this fall into that person that set up, or groups of people that set up a fictitious website against a candidate fall into that could be investigated and then prosecuted?
Yep. Thank you for the question. For the record, Atar Hasibullah, Assembly Member Monroe Moreno. Again, it's situational and specific. If the provisions of proposed Amendment A are included there, which is, again, an imminent threat to the actual, or there's an intimidation communicated, and it's an actual bodily injury threat to a candidate or property threat to a candidate, and it's specifically laid out. Theoretically, it could, but in general, it won't. What would happen in most of those instances where there are really horrific, terrible websites set out that we find to be really just awful at their core, a lot of that contains protected speech, right? And that's why that portion of the Secretary of State's response becomes so important. It doesn't allow for, it doesn't prohibit speech from occurring, including the foul speech and the nasty speech we mentioned, right? But what it does is it precludes the ability to take that one step further, and now somebody's lodged a threat towards somebody's life or property or that of the family member, and that's something that they could consider. So it becomes specific in that regard. To the point Mr. DeCara made, or Deputy Secretary of State DeCara had made a few moments before, there would be nothing that comes of this report that requires any kind of prosecution or substantiation there. It'll be the report that says what the opinion is of the Secretary of State after conducting the investigation. But again, the AG's office would thereafter be required to complete a second investigation. There's a different standard when there's criminal charges brought forth, namely that they're going to need to establish beyond a reasonable doubt at that point, if they're charging someone with the offenses lodged, that they could establish that case in that fashion. The Secretary of State's office wouldn't be required to do that, but the initial report and the timetable associated with it makes that more practicable. A criminal investigation and a criminal prosecution generally in these types of issues isn't tied up within 30 days, but for candidates who are receiving these threats in a very finite window of time, namely the 4 months to 6 months that they end up engaging in a campaign or shorter, it provides a window for an outlet there to have information back from another entity that stated what has occurred.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And next, Assembly Member Cole.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the stories that you told, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And I also appreciate the changes that have been made in this amendment. I think it clarifies a few things. First, my first question is, are you still modifying Chapter 293 of NRS? Because you had mentioned a few other chapters, specifically 200.571 and 199.300. So it's still 293.
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, yes, Assemblymember Cole, it would only be the chapter that's mentioned here that would be adjusted. And again, the reason for that is the other provisions that were provided, whether that's 200.571, which is the broader harassment statute that's applicable to all, or NRS 199.300, which is applicable to specific occupations and titles. Those end up falling within different parameters. They may carry some level of a different penalty, but they also don't require an investigatory report to be completed within 30 days.
Got it, understood. So just in looking at 200.571, there's a section there that talks about the person by words or conduct places the person receiving the threat in reasonable fear that the threat will be carried out. Is that language in the amendment as well? Because I think that is what ties to the criminal aspect of this and it being potentially a gross misdemeanor.
Well, and that becomes a little bit distinctive from 199.300, which has less parameters associated with it. Sorry, for the record, Atar Hasibullah, as you're aware, many of the provisions when we started including different categories and or classes of occupations and or individuals within different statutes in Nevada, it did create some level of inconsistency. There's not one uniform harassment statute statewide. So for specific candidates, this would end up being the language that we thought was probably the most comprehensive, while also protecting free speech and recognizing the distinction that does come up in the nature of campaigns. As we mentioned, a lot of these campaigns there's significantly loaded language used. And because that's oftentimes the case, if not more often than not the case in political campaigns, we didn't want to necessarily add additional portions there. This conforms to the other portions of NRS that we thought were sufficient, as well as the existing bill language. And we thought that portion was sufficient from a constitutional perspective to be able to move forward.
Thank you. Now, for our last question, we have Assemblymember or Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for bringing this bill. It is disheartening to hear that so many of us have this experience. And again, sorry for what you went through as well. My question is there anything in this bill that talks about the number of times? So for example, if currently I'm receiving very hateful, life-threatening emails on another bill that I'm running. And so does it matter how many times somebody sent an email? Is it just a one-time email that you get? Do you see that being prosecuted? Was that taken into consideration when drafting the language?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, Assemblymember Gonzalez, there wasn't a time constraint put within the actual provisions of the bill. I'm not sure one is necessary, but we're certainly happy to consider that, look at it, and ensure that there's sufficient enough language there to make sure that it's encompassing. But I'll also mention that if someone is successful in their campaign, the other statute would likely apply, which is, again, NRS 199.300. You'll want to look at that if, falling within the public official category there. I believe that's specified there, and I'll double check that as well. But I think there's a modification of the existence of the role at that point.
Thank you so much. I guess that brings me to another question. So when would that NRS take over? Is it the day of the election, right? I know that in our state, we become elected officials the day we win our elections. So how would that look if let's say somebody's getting these threatening emails as a candidate, they win, they're an elected official, and then they continue to get these emails. Did you have any discussion about that?
For the record, Atar Hasibullah, Assemblymember Gonzalez, one thing, I probably should have pointed out at the beginning, but I'll point out now, is the modification of the incumbency and the requirement that's imposed within the original bill versus within the amendment. The original bill, as it stood, discussed what a person would do during the pendency of their campaign and what they couldn't do. What this bill does on the back end, with respect to the conceptual amendment, it says what you are unable to do against a candidate for public office. Once that person is no longer a candidate for public office, they're not actively in that specific space, the provisions of this section wouldn't apply. So it's limited to the pendency of what happens during the course of an actual political campaign for public office, and it changes, again, it modifies from the existing bill what a candidate would do or what they can't do to what you can and can't do with respect to the actual candidate that's involved. So the moment that they adjust, on one end, if they, I suppose if I was to answer it this way and offer some level of conjecture, if they were to lose their race, they would likely fall within the broader harassment category if it was to continue, unless they met one of the other statute statuses within NRS 199-300. If they were successful potentially in that race and they're a public official, potentially a different statute would apply at that point. But as it stands with respect to the actual candidate at that point, the focus is on the pendency of the campaign itself.
We're going to move on because we have to be at floor at 4:45, remember? So we will now close this portion. Thank you so much. We'll now open it up for testimony in support of AB 123. Each person has 2 minutes to provide testimony. Again, we have 20 minutes for each before we have to report to floor at 4:45, so I would encourage you to ditto. Please keep your comments to the bill and not about the bill's sponsor. Members of the public may provide testimony in person or over the phone by calling 888-475-4499 and entering the meeting ID 867-6086-9565. So we'll start here in Carson City. Please don't forget to state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Mosca and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Priscilla Gomez. That's spelled Priscella, last name Gomez, Gomez, and I'm the Democracy Manager with Silver State Voices. I'm here in strong support of AB 123 on behalf of my organization and the Let Nevadans Vote Coalition. Nevadans deserve to participate in every part of our democracy without fear or intimidation. That includes candidates being able to run for office without facing harassment or threats to their safety, especially because of their culture, religion, gender, and other aspects of their identity. In a truly representative democracy, fear and intimidation have no place, and this legislation makes that clear. AB 123 is an important step towards ensuring Nevada has a political environment centered around respect. We'd like to thank Assemblymember Nadeem for sharing her story, sponsoring this bill, and working with us on the amendment. We urge the committee to support AB 123. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Janine Hansen. I'm the state president of Nevada Independent American Party. As a part of that party, I've run for office many times in order to keep us on the ballot and been a candidate many times. I have experienced many death threats. During one campaign, I couldn't go anywhere without my husband or my brother serving as bodyguards because I had so many threats. So I appreciate that we were against the original bill. We're in favor of this one, and we appreciate the change that is here. It's always a problem when we can't have mutual respect for one another, when people are threatened, and my children were threatened. My home was threatened. My office was picketed. I've had many opportunities over the years, even in this building, for threats. So I think it's very important that we realize this isn't just for one group of people or another. It crosses all the way across political lines, and that many people have been threatened. And so it's very important that we encourage people to have respect for one another. I feel like that's one of the things, Madam Chair, you've done in this committee, and I appreciate that. And so I think it's important to realize that it's just that there are many political individuals who become involved, and I've heard from my own candidates because right now I'm the state chairman for the party. In fact, last week a couple of weeks ago, I had calls that were threatening me because we didn't do what they wanted to do. So I think it's just part of the territory, but I appreciate the attempt to try to encourage civility and respect for all political points of view and all people of whatever they may represent or whoever they might be. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Carrie Durmick. That is Kerrydurmick, and I'm the state director at Always Local Action Nevada. We are an organization that advocates for policies and legislative priorities that expand voter access. We strongly support AB 123. which prohibits a person from threatening the life of another person, no matter the method of communication during their political campaign. We additionally support the added amendment to this bill, which will allow, through the Secretary of State's office, if any candidate feels that Section 1 of this bill has been violated, especially since if the Secretary of State's office finds that Section 1 of this bill is violated in the report, the Attorney General may prosecute a case. This is an important bill that protects candidates running for public office and will stop life-threatening harassment that we have seen candidates in Nevada endure in the past, and we've heard several times today. I urge you to support AB 123, and thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Chair Mosca and members of the committee. I know it's protocol
I'm
that
sorry,
we
you
come.
didn't say your name and spell it.
My name is Eric Jang, ERICJENG. I'm the Executive Director of One API Nevada. I know it's customary when we come up here, we thank the chair, we thank the committee members, but a lot of time, truly, thank you for your service. We know it's not for the compensation. We know you are here with the support of your family. You are here because you're representing your community. You are here because it's step up for public service. You're here because you want to keep Nevadans safe and prosper. However, a lot of time, this kind of threats are impacting you for keeping yourself and your family safe. And that is something that we were in full support. I'm someone in the community that advocate for a more civic engagement, meaning I recruit candidates, I support community leaders and advocates to speak up. And the threat of political violence is rising. This is a first step in many different ways that we can make sure we protect freedom of speech, but also protect the people that's willing to step up and run for office. So thank you, and we support this bill.
Hello, committee. Jessica Glover, JESSICA, Glover, GLOVER, and I support AB 123. In 2024, I ran for city government, and I experienced the same type of threats. I was stalked and I was harassed as I was running my campaign and doing door knocking. I was being watched, and intimidation tactics to get me to stop. They didn't want me to use my voice at rallies when I go to speak to the public of why I was running and such not. So I believe that just everyone, candidates and electees, should be safe. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. My name is Jim DeGraffenreid, JIMDEGRAFFENREID. I am Nevada's Republican National Committeeman. We were prepared to be in opposition to the original bill, but with the conceptual amendment, the Republican Party would certainly support this. We think it is very important that there be no impediment to candidates being able to run for office without the fear of threats and violence. Even as somewhat below a candidate, I myself have been subject to threats of violence just for being a political activist on various levels. And so we think this is a very important thing. We're in support of the conceptual amendment and look forward to seeing the actual language. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no others, we'll go down to Las Vegas.
Hello, everyone. CYRUSHOJJATY. I want to thank the sponsor for pushing this bill. I really appreciate it. This is very important, very eye-opening. Learned a lot from this, and I think this is very important for the safety and function of candidates who are willing to run, especially third parties. I can tell you that. But other than that, yield.
Thank you. And seeing no others in Las Vegas, AVH, can we please go to the phone lines?
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 123, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rudy Zamora. That's RUDYZAMORA, and I'm here on behalf of Chicanos por la Causa. We're in strong support of AB 123. In an era where political discourse can often become heated and at times dangerous, it is imperative that we take steps to protect individuals from threats of violence. This bill not only enhances the safety of those engaged in political campaigns, but also upholds the integrity of our democratic process by ensuring that political communication remains free from intimidation and fear. We believe that AB 123 is necessary and timely measure that will contribute to a safer and more respectful political environment in Nevada. We urge you to support AB 123. Thank you.
Next caller.
Chair and members of the committee, my name is Shelby Swartz, SHELBIE, SWARTZ, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. We are strongly in support of AB 123 because no one should have to risk their safety to run for office. Yet women, people of color, and especially women of color, face relentless threats and harassment simply for stepping into public service. These threats are not just words, they're meant to silence, intimidate, and push diverse voices out of our democracy. When fear replaces debate, democracy suffers. AB 123 ensures accountability for those who weaponize threats to drive people, particularly marginalized communities, out of our politics. We must take a stand, and AB 123 allows us to do that. Thank you so much.
Next caller.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Jessica Munger, JESSICA MUNGER, and I am testifying in support of AB 123. I'm the program manager for Silver State Equality, Nevada's statewide LGBTQ+ civil rights organization. We support AB 123 because it helps to protect the safety of our citizens and democracy. By working toward a safer democratic process, we can help ensure that Nevada's system is representative and welcoming to all. We urge you to support this vital piece of legislation. Thank you.
Next caller.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tristan St. Dennis, TRYSTINST DENIS. I am the policy associate with the Nevada Conservation League, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Next caller. Caller, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello? All right, my name is Mason Martinez down in Las Vegas, and I would like to oppose this bill. I think it's
Mr. Martinez,
redundant with a lot of
if you can
NRS
please stay on the line. We're in support right now, but just stay on the line. When we move to opposition, I will take you then. Thank you. AVH, next caller in support of this bill, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 913. You're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Aisha Goins, AESHAGOINS, and I'm calling on behalf of Black Joy Consulting. I'm the facilitator of a candidate boot camp called Empowerment Through Action. I appreciate this bill, AB 123, and it's important that we have safety for our underserved community candidates, especially women of color. This is the only way that we can attract, recruit, and retain those candidates. And so I appreciate Assemblymember Nadeem and the facilitators for bringing this bill, and I'll strongly support it. Thank you.
Next caller.
If you recently joined the call and would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 123, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Again, that is for support of Assembly Bill 123.
Hello, my name is Lorena Biasati. I also was a candidate previously. I was originally not in support of this bill, but I have changed my mind because I know there will be many more candidates such as myself who will be winning these seats in the near future. And I too have received a lot of threats. I've been called everything from a white supremacist, a Nazi, KKK member, child abuser. And, you know, I'm not going to cry about it. I'm a big girl. I know what temperature is like in our political climate. So I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to basically try to weaponize anything against our constituents or silencing them. But I would like to see those protections for our future candidates, especially given the nature of things right now where certain people are having their cars vandalized just because it's from a certain maker that they don't agree with. So I can see how the violence is going to be reaching our candidates too, regardless on what side you stand. I do want to note that one of the legislators was asking if this could include feedback from constituents in their emails, and that's concerning. Someone else asked if they could use this to cancel the candidacy of their opponent. And I mean, this is just what's worrisome, is that this bill would be weaponized and you would use your legislative powers to protect your seat against other candidates. So I'm really hopeful you don't use the Secretary of State to start investigations on people that just have opposing views. But if it is in fact used to protect the lives and
Thank you,
the
caller. We
well,
just
the
want to make sure,
safety
and
of
you are
our
at your 2 minutes, so we want to make sure you are in support of the bill as it stands.
as it stands, yes, I hope that no loopholes are used to
Okay,
attack
thank
our
you.
constituents
Thank
in
you
the
for
future.
calling in. Next caller.
Chair, we have no additional callers in support at this time.
Thank you. We will now move into opposition of AB 123 with our 20-minute block. Seeing none in Carson City, we will move down to Las Vegas. Seeing none in Las Vegas, AVH, let's open the phone lines for opposition of AB 123.
If you would like to testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 123, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, go ahead, caller.
Yes, my name is Mason Martinez down here in Las Vegas, and I'm going to go ahead and oppose this. I haven't seen the amendment, but it seems a little redundant. NRS 200.571 already covers when an electronic threat is made and it can be prosecuted. When people were talking about race, gender, sex, and identity, it's already a hate crime to target someone based on that, both federally and statewide. And I would like to represent the 94% opposition of the 56 submissions on the Nevada State Legislature website under public opinion. So 52 people that oppose this legislation. And that is all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next caller.
Hi, this is Katree Saunders for the record, Katree, last name Saunders, Saunders. I represent Americans for Safe Access, and I oppose this bill. As the last caller stated, there are already NRS statutes put into place that take care of this. So we don't need to be redundant. I feel like this is just a loophole so they can bother citizens who oppose their views of corruption and collusion within the state of Nevada. Thank you for your time. This is Katree Saunders.
Thank you. Next caller.
Good afternoon, Oscar Williams, OSCAR, WILLIAMS from Reno. Good afternoon. I'm not necessarily against restricting threats in the political theater, but I got an issue a bit with the format here, because we started with one bill and then these amendments drastically changed the nature of the bill. This is what we call the old legislative bait and switch. Seeing it right on display. This should be a new bill going through the whole BDR process to dramatically shift it with the proposed changes. It's a whole new deal. There are issues of political speech being a protected right, and yet don't endorse threats. And yet, imagine if I was a candidate and I supported abortions after birth. would I be threatening the life of a person, a newborn child, because I believe in late term or after birth abortions? It's in the political theater, but this law would make that criminal, I would think. Now, listen, I'm not supportive of that, but there's a slippery slope when you start to nip and tuck at the rights of free speech. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller.
Chair, we have no additional callers for opposition at this time.
Thank you. And with that, we will now move to neutral. Anyone here in Carson City? We see one approaching, so please. And in Las Vegas, if anyone's here for neutral, please go ahead and take a seat down there.
Good afternoon, Chair Mosca and members of the Assembly Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections. For the record, Michael Morton, M-I-C-H-E-L, last name M-O-R-T-O-N, Special Assistant Attorney General with the Nevada Attorney General's Office. The Attorney General's Office is testifying in neutral today on Assembly Bill 123 while we continue to work with the bill's sponsor on language relating to proper jurisdiction and enforcement of the actions that are proposed in this legislation. The Attorney General's Office has successfully prosecuted cases of misdemeanor harassment and felony stalking of public officials and public employees under existing law, and look forward to further collaboration with the bill sponsor to meet the legislation's objective of protecting those individuals who have declared candidacy for public office. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no other neutral testimony in Carson City, we'll go down to Las Vegas.
Gabriel DeCara, Chief Deputy Secretary of State for the record. I would like to, again, thank the sponsors of this bill and the committee for hearing it. The Secretary of State's office is grateful for the conversation and lauds the intent of this bill and the partnership that we've seen so far from the bill's sponsors. This behavior is reprehensible and has no place in political campaigns. Again, the Secretary of State's office investigates criminal violations of Title 24, and we will continue to do so to protect Nevadans. As mentioned, we may request some further changes to the bill to ensure that we are not too far broadening the Secretary of State's investigative authority. But again, the sponsors have been great to work with, and we look forward to having that conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And seeing no other neutral in Las Vegas, we'll go AVH to the phone lines.
To testify in neutral for Assembly Bill 123, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Gifford. When I first saw AB 123, I wondered, why this bill? What happened? When did it happen and where did it happen? Now in the conversation of this hearing, you've kind of answered my questions, but I must ask, and I think people considering this bill need to know, did those of you who were threatened do anything about this when it happened? And if so, what did you do? And what were the results? Perhaps having this information could help clarify and maybe even strengthen this bill. I hope you can provide those answers in the next hearing of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Here we have no additional callers for neutral at this time.
Thank you. And with that, I would like to invite Assemblymember Nadeem up for any closing remarks.
Assemblymember Hanati Nadeem. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Chair Moscow, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present AB 123. This bill will reduce violence and intimidation during political campaigns and protect the wellness and safety of the candidates. Today's political climate is becoming increasingly charged, and we do not need to add to the tension and violence by allowing people to threaten and intimidate candidates. We all deserve to be treated with respect. Even if we do not necessarily agree with one another's position, I hope you will join me in supporting the bill. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember. And with that, we'll now close the hearing on AB 123. Thank you. Our last item of business is public comment. Each person has 2 minutes to provide testimony. Written public comment may also be submitted to the committee up to 24 hours after the meeting. I will remind everyone of the call-in number and meeting ID for those wishing to make public comment over the phone. The call-in number is 888-475-4499, and the meeting ID is 867-6086-9565. And with that, we'll start here in Carson City. Seeing none for public comment, we will move down to Las Vegas. And you may start when you're ready.
My apologies to hold you up. CYRUS HOJJATY. I just wanted to give a word of appreciation. I'd just like to appreciate the chair actually for mentioning the ID number to call in because it's very, very helpful. A lot of chair people don't do that. It's more efficient. I can just listen and then just punch in the numbers. It's very efficient because a lot of times I have to go from one app to another, and quite a few times I've actually missed the public meetings on the phone. So I really appreciate you mentioning the numbers, and I encourage more to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw one more. Go ahead.
Howdy, folks. Mike check.
If you're,
Mic check.
There
How
you
y'all
go.
doing today?
please state your name and spell it for the record. Thank you.
JC, John Carlo, JOHNCARLO. I'm just here to talk to y'all about same things I was talking to you about a couple of days ago about the shedding of innocent blood. And I just want to tell all these legislators that and Republicans, not just the Democrats, because I know there was a Republican lady who voted on SB 131 of last legislative session, and blood is on your hands, and you will be judged by God at the white throne judgment seat. It's the book
Thank
of
you.
Revelation.
You do need to keep it into legislative operations and elections. So that bill last session was not in legislative operations and elections. So you can keep going if it's in the purview of this committee.
It has to do with everything that y'all are doing. To know that you guys will be judged by God. There is someone who sits higher than you and me, and he's on the throne of heaven. And there is the great white throne judgment in Revelation 20:11. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. So all that to say, as you are up there in Carson City, we have one man here in the room. Wherever you are, you must find forgiveness in the blood of Jesus.
And thank you, Mr.
In
John
Jesus
Carlo.
Christ.
You are at 2 minutes. So with that, anyone else in Las Vegas? Okay, and with that, we will open the phone lines for public comment. Thank you, ABH.
To testify in public comment, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers wishing to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you so much, and we thank all the members for a great meeting today. Remember, you need to be at floor by 4:45. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, March 20th at 4 p.m. Seeing no further business before us, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.